Have you ever felt like you were being watched, even when you were alone? Imagine wandering through a dense forest, the trees towering above you, their branches whispering secrets in the wind. You're lost, disoriented, and the path you thought you knew has vanished. The sun begins to set, casting eerie shadows, and just as panic starts to set in, you hear a rustle behind you. You turn, and there he is, a man standing motionless, his eyes locked onto yours. He doesn't speak, doesn't move, yet there's an undeniable presence about him. Who is he? How did he get there? And why does he seem so familiar? This is the story of a woman who ventured into the forest, only to encounter a man with no past. But as the night unfolds, she realizes that the forest holds more than just trees and wildlife. It holds secrets, mysteries, and perhaps, a connection to her own forgotten memories. Stay with me, because what happens next will challenge everything you thought you knew about reality. The forest, a place of mystery and reflection. Forests have always been places of mystery and reflection. From ancient myths to modern tales, they serve as settings where the known meets the unknown. In many cultures, forests are seen as liminal spaces, places between worlds, where the veil between the real and the supernatural is thin. This story taps into that deep-seated intrigue, drawing you into a world where the boundaries of time and memory blur. As you journey with our protagonist, you'll find yourself questioning, is the forest merely a backdrop, or is it a character in its own right? Is the man she meets a figment of her imagination, a guardian of the woods, or something else entirely? The answers lie within the twists and turns of the narrative, each more surprising than the last. The Woman, A Search for Truth. Our protagonist is not just a random traveler, she's someone on a quest. Perhaps she's seeking solace, answers, or a break from the monotony of daily life. Her journey into the forest is symbolic, a step into the unknown, a challenge to confront her fears and uncertainties. As she delves deeper into the woods, she encounters not just the man with no past, but also fragments of her own history, memories that have long been buried. Her interactions with the man are charged with tension and curiosity. He doesn't offer explanations, doesn't provide comfort. Instead, he presents more questions than answers. Yet, there's something magnetic about him, something that draws her in despite the growing sense of unease. Through their encounters, she begins to unravel layers of her own identity, discovering truths she wasn't ready to face. The man, a puzzle wrapped in enigma. Who is the man with no past? His presence is both comforting and unsettling. He speaks in riddles, his words often cryptic, yet they resonate with a strange familiarity. He seems to know things about her, things she hasn't shared with anyone. Is he a manifestation of her subconscious, a spirit of the forest, or something else entirely? As the story progresses, the man's true nature becomes more ambiguous. Is he a guide, leading her toward self-discovery? Or is he a trickster, leading her astray? His motivations remain unclear, keeping you on edge, eager to uncover his secrets. Themes: memory, identity, and the unseen. At its core, this story delves into themes of memory and identity. The forest serves as a metaphor for the mind, dense, layered, and filled with hidden corners. The man with no past represents the parts of ourselves we've forgotten or suppressed. As the protagonist navigates the forest, she navigates her own psyche, confronting past traumas, lost memories, and the essence of who she truly is. The narrative also explores the idea of the unseen, the things we don't notice, the details that slip through the cracks of our awareness. The forest is teeming with life, yet much of it goes unnoticed. Similarly, our lives are filled with moments and memories we've overlooked or forgotten. This story invites you to pause, to look closer, and to acknowledge the unseen elements that shape our existence. A journey of self-discovery. As the night deepens and the forest grows darker, our protagonist realizes that the journey isn't just about finding her way out, it's about finding herself. The man with no past isn't just a stranger, he's a mirror, reflecting parts of her she hasn't acknowledged. Their encounters force her to confront her fears, her regrets, and her desires. By the end of the story, she understands that the forest wasn't just a physical place, it was a journey inward, a path to self-discovery. The man with no past wasn't a guide leading her out of the forest, he was a catalyst, prompting her to find her own way. Conclusion: A tale that lingers. This story isn't just a tale of getting lost in the woods, it's a narrative that lingers, that makes you think long after the last word is read. It challenges perceptions, plays with reality, and invites introspection. As you reflect on the protagonist's journey, you might find yourself asking, what parts of myself have I forgotten? What truths am I avoiding? And, perhaps most intriguingly, who is the man with no past and what does he reveal about me? Stay tuned, because the journey doesn't end here. The forest holds more secrets, more revelations, and more mysteries waiting to be uncovered. As the moonlight filtered through the dense canopy above, casting long, eerie shadows on the forest floor, the woman stood still, trying to steady her racing heart. Her breath came in shallow gasps, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and the quiet hum of nocturnal life. But it wasn't the night that unnerved her, it was the man. His presence was like a knot in her chest, tightening with every passing moment. She didn't know how he'd appeared, or why he was here. She hadn't even heard him coming. One moment, she had been walking alone down a narrow path, lost in her own thoughts. The next, he was there, watching her, as if he had been waiting all along. His face was familiar in a way that unsettled her more than it comforted her. Was it a face from her past? A memory she couldn't place, or was he just a figment of her disoriented mind? She tried to shake off the feeling, but the reality of her situation was slowly starting to sink in. It wasn't just the man she had to worry about, it was everything that had led her to this point. For the past few weeks, her life had felt like it was slipping through her fingers, like she was caught in a fog that refused to clear. There had been strange occurrences, disconnected conversations with people she thought she knew, and moments where she'd wake up in unfamiliar places, not knowing how she got there. Her friends had noticed it too. They'd commented on how distant she seemed, as though something was wrong, but she couldn't put it into words. She had just chalked it up to stress, to the overwhelming weight of recent changes in her life, but now, standing in this shadowed forest, it all felt like something more. Something deeper. Her relationships had been on the rocks for months, but it was the sudden disappearance of her close friend, Mara, that had truly shaken her. Mara had been like a sister to her, always there, always the one person who seemed to understand the chaos in her life. But then, one evening, Mara simply vanished. No phone calls, no messages, no explanation. It was as if she had evaporated into thin air. The police had been called, friends and family had searched, but no one had found anything. The only lead had been a cryptic message on Mara's phone, a text that read, "I've found something. You have to see it for yourself." But that was it. No context, no further information. Mara was gone, and the authorities were at a loss. In the weeks that followed, the woman had been consumed by an unsettling sense of guilt. Had she missed something? Had there been signs she had ignored? And more disturbingly, was Mara's disappearance connected to her own strange experiences? The more she thought about it, the more she couldn't escape the feeling that this forest was somehow tied to it all. Why had she ended up here, alone in the dark, in the very place where Mara had disappeared? It wasn't as if she had planned to come here. It was a spur-of-the-moment decision. She had been driving, her mind heavy with questions, and had ended up taking the wrong turn, a mistake that led her down a winding, narrow road into the heart of the woods. She had tried to turn around, but the road seemed to stretch on endlessly, pulling her deeper into the forest, as if it had a mind of its own. Her phone had lost signal hours ago, and now, she couldn't even remember which direction she had come from. And then, there was the man. What did he want from her? What did he know? His eyes, piercing and dark, seemed to hold a knowledge that was both foreign and intimate. She hadn't told him anything about herself, so how could he know the things he'd said? He had mentioned Mara's name without her ever saying it aloud, and his words had hinted at something far more sinister than she was willing to consider. He spoke of secrets buried deep within the forest, secrets that had been hidden for generations. Could Mara have stumbled upon something she wasn't supposed to? Was the man somehow involved in her disappearance? Or was he just a strange coincidence, a wandering hermit who had lived too long in isolation? Every instinct in her screamed to run, to escape the suffocating silence that surrounded her, but something in his gaze kept her rooted to the spot. It was as if he had already seen her, understood her, in ways that made her feel exposed. But before she could gather her thoughts, The rustling of leaves broke the silence, and she was startled by the appearance of a figure in the distance. Another person? Or something more dangerous? Her heart raced again as she strained her eyes to see. But as quickly as the figure had appeared, it vanished into the darkness, leaving her with more questions than answers. Was it possible that there were others out here, other people who knew more than they were letting on? Or were the shadows of the forest playing tricks on her, bending reality to their will? She couldn't trust her senses anymore, couldn't even trust her own mind. The eerie, half-formed shapes in the trees seemed to shift, and the sounds of the forest, once peaceful, now seemed charged with an unsettling energy. The deeper she went, the more the air seemed to press in around her, thick with an invisible weight. And then, just as she thought the tension might crack her, the man spoke again. His voice was low, deliberate, almost as if he were speaking in riddles. You know, sometimes, the forest reveals things you didn't ask to see. It shows you pieces of yourself you didn't even know were missing. He paused, letting his words linger in the air. But there's a price to knowing the truth. You'll have to decide if you're willing to pay it. Her breath caught in her throat. Was he talking about Mara? Was he suggesting that the answers she sought were hidden in the forest, but uncovering them would come at a cost? The weight of his words settled heavily in the pit of her stomach. Could she trust him? Was he leading her to something or away from it? The uncertainty was maddening, but she couldn't ignore the gnawing sense that the answers she needed were within her grasp, just beyond the veil of this strange encounter. As the night pressed on and the forest seemed to close in around her, she realized that she wasn't just walking through the woods, she was walking through a puzzle, one that was slowly revealing itself piece by piece. And with each step, she was drawing closer to a revelation that would change everything. The air felt heavier as she took another step, her eyes scanning the dense shadows of the forest, her mind struggling to process the cryptic words of the man. The deeper she walked, the more she felt as though the trees themselves were closing in around her, as if the forest was alive, watching, listening. There was no sound now, save for the rhythmic thump of her heart in her chest. She couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't alone, even though she couldn't see anyone. The rustling noises she had heard earlier seemed to have grown fainter, but the sensation of being watched had intensified. Just as she was beginning to process everything, the mysterious man, the strange feelings, the unease that had lodged itself deep within her, something strange happened. Her phone, which had been without signal for hours, buzzed in her pocket. She jumped at the sudden noise, heart racing, thinking maybe this was the break she needed. Her fingers fumbled as she pulled it out, almost afraid to look, but when she saw the screen, her heart sank. There was a message. It was from Mara. Or at least, it looked like it was. The text read, "It's too late. They know you're coming." But the timestamp showed it had been sent at least 2 days ago. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up. How was this possible? Her phone had been off, no signal, no messages should have been coming through. Before she could even process the message, the phone flickered and then shut off completely. The screen went dark, and no amount of pressing or holding buttons could bring it back to life. She stared at it, a cold sweat creeping down her spine. Had someone tampered with it? Was it a glitch? Or was someone else playing games with her, someone who knew she was out here, in the forest, alone? A sudden crash of branches snapped her out of her thoughts. Her head whipped up in alarm, but there was nothing except the whisper of the wind and the soft groan of the trees. But she wasn't alone. She could feel it. Someone was watching her, moving just out of her line of sight. She had to know what was going on, had to figure out where Mara was, but every step seemed to lead her deeper into confusion and fear. She turned, determined to head back, but just as she started retracing her steps, she noticed something on the ground, something small, half buried beneath the leaves. Kneeling down, she reached out to touch it. Her fingers brushed against a small, leather-bound journal. It looked old, its edges frayed and worn, but the handwriting inside seemed oddly familiar. She opened it, her eyes scanning the words frantically, but as she read, something felt off. The entries were dated, but the dates didn't make sense. Some were from the past few months, others from years ago. And the names mentioned in the journal, they weren't strangers. They were people she knew, people she had once trusted, people who had played crucial roles in her life, including Mara. One entry, in particular, made her blood run cold. She's starting to remember. The key to the forest is the man with no past. She must never find him. If she does, it's over. We can't let her see what's hidden beneath the trees. The words were clear, unmistakable. Someone knew. Someone had been keeping secrets from her. But who? And what was hidden in the forest? What had Mara gotten herself into? As she read the words over and over, trying to make sense of them, she heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, approaching from behind. Her pulse quickened, and her instinct screamed for her to run. She snapped the journal shut, stuffing it into her jacket pocket as quickly as she could. Her breath came in shallow bursts. She wasn't alone anymore. Someone was there, and they weren't just following her. They were waiting for her to make the first move. It was then that the man appeared again. This time, he was closer than ever before, emerging from the shadows like a ghost, his dark eyes locking onto hers with a knowing intensity. She tried to speak, to demand answers, but no words came out. It felt as though the very air was thickening around her, pressing in on her chest, making it hard to breathe. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, watching her, his expression unreadable. Then, finally, he spoke, his voice low and cold. "You shouldn't have read it," he said, his tone almost gentle, but there was an unmistakable warning in his words. "The past you're digging into isn't yours to find. Some things are meant to stay buried." His eyes flicked briefly to the journal in her pocket. "And now you've made a choice. One you might regret." The tension in the air was palpable. Every instinct told her to run, but she couldn't move, couldn't tear her gaze away from his eyes. There was a heaviness in the silence that seemed to stretch on forever. But before she could even respond, a voice called out from behind her, a familiar voice, but one she hadn't expected to hear. "Leave her alone. She doesn't know anything yet." Her heart skipped a beat. It was Mara's voice. But how? What was happening? She turned, her eyes searching the darkness for the source of the voice, but all she saw were the shadows of the trees, shifting and whispering in the night. And then, as quickly as it had come, the voice was gone. A sickening realization gripped her. Was she hearing things? Was her mind playing tricks on her? Or had Mara somehow returned? Was she in danger? Before she could make sense of it, the man spoke again, his voice low and insistent. "You don't understand. You think you're chasing answers, but what you're really doing is chasing a lie. You're in too deep, and it's not just the forest that's keeping you here." She looked at him, heart pounding. "What do you mean?" she asked, the words almost coming out as a whisper, as if speaking too loudly would shatter the fragile grip she had on her reality. He shook his head, a faint, almost sorrowful smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "You'll see soon enough. But by then, it might be too late." The weight of his words pressed on her chest like a vice, and as the last of the evening's light faded, leaving her in complete darkness, she felt an undeniable truth settle into her bones. Something was very wrong. She wasn't just in the forest anymore. She was in the middle of a game, one with stakes higher than she could ever have imagined. But who was playing it, and who was really in control? The answers seemed to slip further away the harder she tried to hold on to them, leaving her trapped between the shadows and the unknown. And in that moment, she knew she was closer than ever to uncovering a truth she might not survive. The darkness seemed to press in on her, swallowing the small patch of light cast by the dim glow of the fading moon. The man's words hung in the air like an ominous echo, and despite the rising dread clawing at her insides, she couldn't look away. She felt trapped, caught between the man's cryptic warnings and the growing uncertainty of her own mind. The forest had become a labyrinth, not just of trees and shadows, but of hidden truths and forgotten memories. She wasn't just lost in the woods, she was losing herself in a tangled web of lies and half-recalled faces, and the further she went, the more dangerous it seemed. But just as the weight of the situation was about to crush her, her phone vibrated once again, almost mockingly, from her pocket. Her hands shook as she pulled it out, hoping for anything that might make sense of the nightmare unfolding around her. To her shock, the message was from an unfamiliar number, one she didn't recognize. The text read, "They're watching you. Don't trust the man in the woods. He's not who he says he is. You need to leave before it's too late." It was brief, but its meaning was undeniable. Someone knew what was happening, someone who wasn't supposed to be involved, and they were warning her. Her pulse quickened as she stared at the words, her mind racing. But who could it be? Who had sent it? And how did they know what she was experiencing? The number didn't match anyone she had ever met, and yet, there was a feeling in the pit of her stomach that told her this message, too, was a piece of the puzzle she wasn't yet ready to solve. Her gaze flickered back to the man, standing in front of her, his expression unreadable. It was as if he was waiting for her to react, to make some sort of decision, but she wasn't sure what to do. Leave. Stay. Trust the mysterious voice in the text, or trust the strange man who had become the center of all her confusion? Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden movement in the woods, a figure darting through the trees, too fast for her to make out clearly. Her heart leapt into her throat, and instinctively, she turned, her feet propelling her forward in the direction of the figure. She didn't know why, but something deep within her urged her to follow. But as quickly as the figure had appeared, it vanished, leaving nothing but the rustling of leaves behind. She stopped, breathless, hands trembling at her sides. Her mind screamed at her to turn back, but she didn't. She couldn't. Not with the message still fresh in her mind. Not when something in the forest was drawing her deeper, something she couldn't see, something that felt just out of reach. The cold air bit at her skin as she glanced over her shoulder one more time, hoping to catch a glimpse of the man, but he was gone, too. There was no sign of him anywhere. Confused and frightened, she began walking faster, trying to steady her breath. The only sound now was her own footsteps, pounding against the ground, but she didn't dare stop. She didn't want to be alone. Not now. Not with everything that was at stake. Her thoughts were racing, jumping from one question to the next, when suddenly, her phone buzzed again. The message came through in an instant. Get out. Now. It was from Mara. But this time, it was different. The tone was urgent, desperate. Her hands were shaking violently as she read the words over and over. Was Mara alive? How could this be happening? Was it possible that Mara had somehow been trying to reach her all along? Or had someone been using her phone to send these cryptic texts? The confusion was overwhelming, but just as quickly as the doubts began to pile on, something even more unsettling happened. She reached the edge of a small clearing, one she didn't recognize. Her breath caught in her throat when she saw it, an old, decaying wooden cabin, its structure crooked, abandoned, yet somehow still standing against the pull of time. It was nestled against the trees, barely visible from the path she had been walking. There was something undeniably off about it. It wasn't just its eerie appearance or the way the wind seemed to whistle through its broken windows, it was the undeniable sense that she had seen this place before. Before she could gather her thoughts, a voice called out to her from behind. A voice she didn't expect, one that made her freeze in place. It was her brother, Alex. He had been one of the few people who hadn't given up on finding Mara. The last time she had seen him, they'd been sitting together at the kitchen table, trying to piece together what happened, trying to understand why their friend had disappeared. He had been the one person who had tried to reassure her, who had refused to let her believe the worst. But now, his voice echoed through the forest, distant but unmistakable. "Don't go in there," he said, his voice sharp with panic. "It's not what you think. You don't know what's inside." She turned around quickly, expecting to see him standing there, but there was no sign of him. No footsteps, no movement. Just silence. But the words remained, lingering in her ears like a warning, a sign that she was in deeper than she could ever imagine. The world seemed to close in on her, and in that moment, the questions piled up, each one more disturbing than the last. Was Alex really here? Was he part of whatever was happening? Or was someone else using his voice to manipulate her? The confusion gnawed at her as she stood frozen in the clearing, torn between the urge to run and the overwhelming need to uncover the truth. And then, without warning, the door to the cabin creaked open, slow and deliberate. She didn't move, too afraid to approach, too afraid to turn away. She could feel the tension building in her chest, a pressure that threatened to suffocate her. Someone was in there. She had to know what it was, but part of her knew that stepping through that door might be the last choice she would ever make. Suddenly, her phone buzzed again. She pulled it out, almost afraid to look, but when she saw the new message, Her blood ran cold. It wasn't from Mara, or anyone she recognized. The text read, "You're too close now. You can't turn back." Her hand shook as she stared at the words, and for the first time, she understood that the forest, the man, and everything surrounding her wasn't just a series of coincidences. It was a trap. A trap designed to lead her into a truth that no one wanted her to see. The deeper she dug, the more dangerous it became. But now, she had no choice. There was no turning back. The wind picked up again, howling through the trees like a warning, and the shadows around her seemed to grow deeper, more oppressive. Her eyes flickered between the old cabin and the dark forest beyond it, the urge to run at war with the pull to uncover whatever dark secret lay hidden behind that decaying door. But something in her gut told her that entering that cabin wouldn't just answer her questions, it would make her a part of something far more sinister than she had ever imagined. Her breath came in ragged bursts, and she realized that her hands were trembling uncontrollably as she gripped her phone tightly, trying to calm her nerves. But there was no relief from the gnawing fear. The uncertainty was eating away at her. Her phone buzzed again, and her heart skipped a beat. It was a message from an unknown number. This time, the text didn't read like a warning, it read like a promise. "We see you. You can't escape now." She felt her stomach lurch, the breath leaving her body in a rush as her pulse spiked. Someone had been watching her, someone knew exactly where she was. The words were too direct, too personal, to be a coincidence. This wasn't just about Mara anymore. It wasn't just about the cryptic messages or the strange man in the woods. She was being hunted. And as the full weight of that realization hit her, the air around her seemed to thicken, her thoughts swirling in panic as she tried to make sense of it all. The text was clear, and the warning in it was undeniable. She had no control over what was happening anymore. She had walked into something much darker, and now, it was closing in on her. She spun around, her heart hammering in her chest, but the forest remained still. The trees stood like silent sentinels, unmoving and indifferent, as if they had swallowed the world whole. No footsteps. No voices. Nothing. Her eyes darted from shadow to shadow, her mind spinning. Had someone been following her all along? Had they been in the forest this entire time, waiting for her to make the wrong move? She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched from all angles. Every crack of a twig, every rustling of leaves sent a new jolt of panic through her. She took a step back, her eyes glued to the woods, the overwhelming silence pressing in on her. And then, she heard it. A faint noise, too soft to be anything normal, a whisper, like a distant murmur, carried on the wind. It wasn't a voice she could recognize, but it sounded too close to ignore. She turned quickly, heart racing, but when she looked around, there was nothing but the blackness of the trees closing in around her. The cabin loomed ahead, its windows like hollow eyes watching her every move. She was alone, and yet she felt the suffocating weight of countless unseen eyes upon her, as though every shadow held a secret, every sound was a threat. Her breathing became erratic, her mind spiraling. She needed to leave. She needed to find Alex, or someone, anyone, who could help her. The idea of being alone in this place, where everything felt wrong, where the very air seemed to have been tainted by some unseen force, was unbearable. She took one last look at the cabin, hesitating for a moment as the door creaked slightly, almost as if beckoning her inside. Then, with a deep breath, she turned and began walking quickly back down the path, hoping she could find her way out before whatever was hunting her caught up. It wasn't far. It couldn't be. She had been walking this path for hours, but the uncertainty of the forest had warped her sense of direction. With each step, the trees seemed to grow taller, the path narrowing and winding in ways she didn't remember. Every time she tried to focus, to find a point of reference, her mind betrayed her, filling her with even more doubt. The woods felt endless now. It was as if the forest was trying to keep her there, trapping her in a maze of its own making, and the harder she tried to escape, the more twisted it became. And then, just as she thought she saw a clearing up ahead, something truly horrifying happened. She heard a scream. It wasn't far. It was sharp, desperate, and unmistakable. Her heart froze, and for a moment, her feet refused to move. The sound was so raw, so full of terror, that it sent a jolt of ice through her veins. The scream was cut short, but in that silence, She could feel the echo of it, ringing in her ears. It was a sound she knew, one she recognized, Alex. It was Alex's voice. Her stomach twisted violently as she sprinted toward the source of the scream, adrenaline coursing through her veins, but with each step, the sound grew fainter. Was he okay? What had happened? She couldn't see him, couldn't hear anything other than her pounding footsteps. Her mind raced, the horror building with every moment. He had been here. He had been following her, trying to help her, hadn't he? But now, that scream, that desperate plea for help, it made everything feel wrong. She couldn't think straight anymore. She was caught in a frenzy of confusion and fear, each step pushing her closer to the truth she wasn't ready to confront. Then, a figure appeared ahead, just at the edge of her vision. She stopped dead in her tracks, her breath caught in her throat. It was him. It was Alex, or at least, it looked like him. He was standing there in the middle of the path, his back to her. His posture was stiff, unnatural, and he didn't move when she called his name. He didn't even turn. She took a cautious step forward, her mind screaming at her to stop, but she couldn't. Something was off. So off. She called his name again, but this time, her voice wavered, filled with fear and confusion. Still, no response. And then, as she approached, she saw it, his hands, blooded and clenched at his sides. There was something wrong with his eyes too, something vacant and cold. It was like he wasn't even really there. Her feet finally moved, her heart pounding harder than before. "Alex," she whispered, her voice shaky, but before she could take another step, he turned. Slowly, deliberately. His face was pale, hollow, as if the life had been drained from him. His eyes locked with hers, but there was no recognition, no warmth, just an empty stare. And in that moment, everything she feared began to unravel. His lips parted, and in the hollow, echoing silence, he spoke the one word that shattered everything she thought she knew: leave. The sound of his voice was strange, wrong, like it came from somewhere else, somewhere distant. Her blood ran cold, and she stepped back, unable to breathe. This wasn't Alex. Not anymore. Whatever this was, whatever was standing in front of her, it wasn't her brother. The realization hit her with brutal force. As the terrifying truth seeped into her bones, she was truly alone. And as the darkness pressed in on her from all sides, she understood. She wasn't just lost in the woods. She was being hunted, and whoever was controlling this nightmare had made it personal. With no answers, only fear, she turned and ran, deeper into the forest, away from the thing that wore Alex's face. The chase was on, and this time, there was no escaping it. She ran blindly, her feet slapping against the dirt, her breath coming in frantic bursts as she pushed through the thickening trees. The sound of her heartbeat filled her ears, and every rustling leaf sent her into a fresh panic. She couldn't stop. Not now. She had to get away from whatever was chasing her, from whatever had taken the shape of her brother and turned him into something unrecognizable. As she darted through the underbrush, her thoughts were a blur, adrenaline clouding everything except the overwhelming need to escape. But just as she was about to reach what looked like an opening in the forest, she slammed into someone who had been waiting there, just out of sight. Her body jerked back with the force of the impact, and she stumbled, trying to regain her balance. Before she could react, two hands gripped her shoulders, spinning her around. It was him. The man she had encountered in the woods. The one whose words had been nothing but cryptic riddles, whose presence had lingered like a dark shadow ever since she'd first met him. His eyes locked onto hers, cold and unreadable, and for a moment, she felt like she was falling into them. But something was different now, something in the way he held her gaze. The fear she had felt earlier was replaced with a chilling certainty that she wasn't going to escape this time. He didn't speak right away, but his grip on her tightened, and she could feel the tension in his arms. She opened her mouth to scream, to fight back, but before she could, he spoke. "Running won't help you," he said, his voice flat, emotionless. "It's already started." Her pulse surged as the words hit her like a cold wave. "What are you talking about? What's happening? Why did you pretend to help me?" He didn't answer her immediately. Instead, he just stood there, his eyes scanning her face as if he were looking for something. Something she didn't understand. She shook her head, trying to make sense of it all. Her mind was racing, piecing together the fragments of information, but it felt like the more she tried to figure it out, the further away the answers slipped. The questions were piling up, too many to ignore. And then, in a sudden shift, his expression softened, just enough to send a shiver down her spine. His voice dropped lower, barely a whisper, as he leaned in closer. "You really don't remember, do you?" The words hit her like a slap to the face. "What do you mean?" Her voice trembled despite herself. "I don't remember what?" He sighed, his fingers loosening their grip just enough for her to take a breath. "This isn't what you think. You're not here by accident. You never were. Everything about this place, about you, it's all a lie." Her stomach dropped, and for a moment, the ground beneath her felt unsteady, like it might give way. She wanted to scream, but the words caught in her throat. She was starting to understand, or at least, starting to feel like the pieces were falling into place in a way that made everything feel wrong. The forest, the messages, Mara's disappearance, it all felt connected, but in a way that made no sense. She was beginning to realize she'd been looking at it from the wrong angle the entire time. The clues were there, hidden in plain sight, but she hadn't been ready to see them until now. His words hung in the air, taunting her, and the silence between them grew thick. The man took a step back, his eyes still trained on her, almost as if he were waiting for her to remember something. And just as the tension reached its peak, the world seemed to tilt. A flash of memory, uninvited, unwelcome, flashed before her eyes. A scene she didn't recognize at first, but when it settled into place, it was like a punch to the gut. It was the cabin. But not the decaying one in the woods. A different one, cleaner, more familiar, as though it had been part of her life once. She was standing in the doorway, looking out over a small, sunlit clearing. But it wasn't just her there. There was someone else in the room with her, someone she hadn't seen before, but whose face seemed inexplicably familiar. And then, as quickly as the memory came, it vanished, leaving her gasping for air, disoriented, caught in a haze of confusion. Her mind reeled as she tried to process what had just happened. What did you do to me?" Her voice cracked, fear rising in her chest. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, weathered notebook. It looked like it had been carried for years, its edges worn and frayed. He handed it to her, but she didn't take it at first. She couldn't. She was too terrified to touch it. His fingers brushed hers briefly, sending a cold shock through her. "You were always meant to find this," he said, his voice low, almost regretful. "But it was never meant to be easy." Was he okay? What had happened? She couldn't see him, couldn't hear anything other than her pounding footsteps. Her mind raced, the horror building with every moment. He had been here. He had been following her, trying to help her, hadn't he? But now, that scream, that desperate plea for help, it made everything feel wrong. She couldn't think straight anymore. She was caught in a frenzy of confusion and fear, each step pushing her closer to the truth she wasn't ready to confront. Then, a figure appeared ahead, just at the edge of her vision. She stopped dead in her tracks, her breath caught in her throat. It was him. It was Alex, or at least, it looked like him. He was standing there in the middle of the path, his back to her. His posture was stiff, unnatural, and he didn't move when she called his name. He didn't even turn. She took a cautious step forward, her mind screaming at her to stop, but she couldn't. Something was off. So off. She called his name again, but this time, her voice wavered, filled with fear and confusion. Still, no response. And then, as she approached, she saw it, his hands, blooded and clenched at his sides. There was something wrong with his eyes too, something vacant and cold. It was like he wasn't even really there. Her feet finally moved, her heart pounding harder than before. "Alex," she whispered, her voice shaky, but before she could take another step, he turned. Slowly, deliberately. His face was pale, hollow, as if the life had been drained from him. His eyes locked with hers, but there was no recognition, no warmth, just an empty stare. And in that moment, everything she feared began to unravel. His lips parted, and in the hollow, echoing silence, he spoke the one word that shattered everything she thought she knew: leave. The sound of his voice was strange, wrong, like it came from somewhere else, somewhere distant. Her blood ran cold, and she stepped back, unable to breathe. This wasn't Alex. Not anymore. Whatever this was, whatever was standing in front of her, it wasn't her brother. The realization hit her with brutal force. As the terrifying truth seeped into her bones, she was truly alone. And as the darkness pressed in on her from all sides, she understood. She wasn't just lost in the woods. She was being hunted, and whoever was controlling this nightmare had made it personal. With no answers, only fear, she turned and ran, deeper into the forest, away from the thing that wore Alex's face. The chase was on, and this time, there was no escaping it. She ran blindly, her feet slapping against the dirt, her breath coming in frantic bursts as she pushed through the thickening trees. The sound of her heartbeat filled her ears, and every rustling leaf sent her into a fresh panic. She couldn't stop. Not now. She had to get away from whatever was chasing her, from whatever had taken the shape of her brother and turned him into something unrecognizable. As she darted through the underbrush, her thoughts were a blur, adrenaline clouding everything except the overwhelming need to escape. But just as she was about to reach what looked like an opening in the forest, she slammed into someone who had been waiting there, just out of sight. Her body jerked back with the force of the impact, and she stumbled, trying to regain her balance. Before she could react, two hands gripped her shoulders, spinning her around. It was him. The man she had encountered in the woods. The one whose words had been nothing but cryptic riddles, whose presence had lingered like a dark shadow ever since she'd first met him. His eyes locked onto hers, cold and unreadable, and for a moment, she felt like she was falling into them. But something was different now, something in the way he held her gaze. The fear she had felt earlier was replaced with a chilling certainty that she wasn't going to escape this time. He didn't speak right away, but his grip on her tightened, and she could feel the tension in his arms. She opened her mouth to scream, to fight back, but before she could, he spoke. "Running won't help you," he said, his voice flat, emotionless. "It's already started." Her pulse surged as the words hit her like a cold wave. "What are you talking about? What's happening? Why did you pretend to help me?" He didn't answer her immediately. Instead, he just stood there, his eyes scanning her face as if he were looking for something. Something she didn't understand. She shook her head, trying to make sense of it all. Her mind was racing, piecing together the fragments of information, but it felt like the more she tried to figure it out, the further away the answers slipped. The questions were piling up, too many to ignore. And then, in a sudden shift, his expression softened, just enough to send a shiver down her spine. His voice dropped lower, barely a whisper, as he leaned in closer. "You really don't remember, do you?" The words hit her like a slap to the face. "What do you mean?" Her voice trembled despite herself. "I don't remember what?" He sighed, his fingers loosening their grip just enough for her to take a breath. "This isn't what you think. You're not here by accident. You never were. Everything about this place, about you, it's all a lie." Her stomach dropped, and for a moment, the ground beneath her felt unsteady, like it might give way. She wanted to scream, but the words caught in her throat. She was starting to understand, or at least, starting to feel like the pieces were falling into place in a way that made everything feel wrong. The forest, the messages, Mara's disappearance, it all felt connected, but in a way that made no sense. She was beginning to realize she'd been looking at it from the wrong angle the entire time. The clues were there, hidden in plain sight, but she hadn't been ready to see them until now. His words hung in the air, taunting her, and the silence between them grew thick. The man took a step back, his eyes still trained on her, almost as if he were waiting for her to remember something. And just as the tension reached its peak, the world seemed to tilt. A flash of memory, uninvited, unwelcome, flashed before her eyes. A scene she didn't recognize at first, but when it settled into place, it was like a punch to the gut. It was the cabin. But not the decaying one in the woods. A different one, cleaner, more familiar, as though it had been part of her life once. She was standing in the doorway, looking out over a small, sunlit clearing. But it wasn't just her there. There was someone else in the room with her, someone she hadn't seen before, but whose face seemed inexplicably familiar. And then, as quickly as the memory came, it vanished, leaving her gasping for air, disoriented, caught in a haze of confusion. Her mind reeled as she tried to process what had just happened. What did you do to me? Her voice cracked, fear rising in her chest. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, weathered notebook. It looked like it had been carried for years, its edges worn and frayed. He handed it to her, but she didn't take it at first. She couldn't. She was too terrified to touch it. His fingers brushed hers briefly, sending a cold shock through her. You were always meant to find this, he said, his voice low, almost regretful. But it was never meant to be easy. Against every instinct that screamed at her to run, she opened the notebook, the pages stiff and unfamiliar in her hands. As she flipped through it, her eyes widened in disbelief. The pages were filled with names she didn't recognize, dates that seemed to mark significant events in a life she couldn't remember. But there, scribbled on one of the last pages, was her name. Her full name, written in ink that looked like it had been freshly applied. Her pulse raced as she scanned the words beneath it. Subject 15, disappearance under unknown circumstances. Recovered, but memories altered. Unable to identify source of trauma. The words blurred as she tried to make sense of them, but the truth hit her hard and fast, like a slap across the face. This wasn't just about the forest. This wasn't just about Mara or the strange man. She was the mystery. Her mind was spinning, reeling with the implications. How had she ended up in the forest? Why couldn't she remember what had happened to her? And who had been manipulating her all along? The man was watching her closely, and she could see the flicker of something dangerous, behind his eyes. You don't have much time left, he said quietly. They'll be here soon. She looked up at him, her heart pounding in her chest. Who is coming? But the man didn't answer. Instead, he turned and vanished into the trees, leaving her alone with nothing but the notebook and the crushing realization that everything she thought she knew had been a lie. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together, but the truth, whatever it was, felt like it was slipping further and further away. She wasn't just lost in the woods anymore. She was lost in her own life, and whoever was behind this wasn't finished with her yet. And now, she understood. She was being hunted, but not by the man in the woods. She was being hunted by the people who had erased her past, who had twisted her mind into something unrecognizable. The stakes had changed, and she had no idea how deep the deception ran. But one thing was clear, the game was only just beginning. The night had settled in thick and suffocating, wrapping itself around her like a heavy blanket. The forest, once alive with the rustle of leaves and the distant calls of animals, had fallen silent. It felt as though the trees themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something, waiting for her to make a decision. Her hand still gripped the old notebook, now crumpled and worn from her desperate handling. She stared at it, at the words written on those pages that made her head spin, unable to process the truth she had uncovered, yet unable to deny it either. Her thoughts were a tangled mess of confusion and fear. She should have known it wasn't just some random forest, some wild conspiracy. The deeper she dug, the more she realized the undeniable truth. This was personal, and it was something far bigger than she could have ever imagined. She wasn't just a bystander in some twisted game. She was the game. But it wasn't the forest or the strange man she feared now, it was the people she thought she could trust. Alex. He had always been her protector, her rock. The one person who had been there for her through everything. He had been the one who warned her, who had tried to keep her away from all of this. But the moment she had seen him in the woods, blooded and broken, with that blank, hollow look in his eyes, something inside her had shifted. She wasn't sure if it was fear or betrayal, but there was a gnawing suspicion in her chest that refused to go away. Had he been playing a part in all of this? Was he part of the lie? Or had he been manipulated too, just like her? And then, of course, there was the man, the one who had been following her, guiding her with cryptic messages, making her feel like she was somehow chosen for something. He was part of the puzzle, yes, but so was Alex. And the more she thought about it, the more the pieces didn't fit. Why had Alex stayed so distant, so strangely protective, even after everything she had learned? Why had he lied to her? The unanswered questions swirled around her head, each one more insistent than the last. A sudden noise snapped her from her thoughts, twigs snapping underfoot. Her body tensed as she turned toward the source of the sound, expecting to see the familiar figure of Alex. But as the shadow emerged from the tree line, it wasn't him. It was someone else, someone she hadn't expected to see. Her breath caught in her throat as the person stepped into the dim light. It was Caitlin, her best friend, the one person who had stood by her through every twist and turn. Or so she thought. Caitlin's face was drawn, her expression unreadable, her eyes dark with something Mara couldn't place. And in her hand, she was holding something that made Mara's blood run cold, a small, black device, identical to the one she had found earlier, the one that had been used to send her the mysterious messages. Mara, Caitlin's voice was low, steady, but there was something behind it, a tension that Mara had never noticed before. We need to talk. Mara's mind raced, her heart pounding in her chest. She wanted to ask Caitlin what she was doing here, why she had that device, why she looked like someone who knew more than she let on. But the words wouldn't come. All she could do was stare at her, waiting for the truth to hit her like a hammer. I know what's going on, Caitlin, Mara said finally, her voice trembling despite her efforts to remain calm. I know everything. The messages, the cabin, the notebook. I know it's all connected. And I need you to tell me what you've been hiding. Her voice grew stronger as she spoke, but the fear clawed at her insides. I need to know what role you're playing in all of this. Caitlin didn't respond immediately. Instead, she stepped closer, her eyes flicking toward the device in her hand, and then back to Mara, her face an unreadable mask. You're wrong, Mara, Caitlin said, her voice barely above a whisper. You don't understand. This wasn't supposed to happen. You weren't supposed to find out. We were supposed to protect you. Protect me. Mara's voice was sharp now, disbelief dripping from every syllable. By lying to me. By keeping me in the dark. By letting me wander around the forest like some kind of experiment. How is that protecting me? Caitlin's expression faltered, just for a split second, before she steadied herself again. You don't get it. You can't get it. Not until you make a choice. Mara's heart skipped a beat. What are you talking about? Caitlin's gaze shifted, as if searching for the right words. There's a way to end this. To stop all of it. But you have to make a decision, and it's not one you can walk away from. She paused, her lips tightening. You have to decide whether you want the truth, or if you want to survive. The words hit Mara like a punch to the gut. Her mind reeled, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. Survive? What did Caitlin mean by that? What was the truth worth if it meant losing her safety, or worse, her life? Could she live with knowing what had happened, what had been done to her, if it meant putting an end to this nightmare? Or would she turn her back on the truth, choose to bury the answers, and run from the danger that was closing in on her? Caitlin, Mara said, her voice barely audible, what is this about? What do you want from me? For the first time, Caitlin's eyes softened, her gaze filled with something that looked like guilt, or was it regret? She took a deep breath, stepping even closer to Mara, the distance between them now non-existent. You think you've been in control. But everything has already been decided for you. Everything that's happened, it's all part of a plan. A plan that's been in motion for a long time. And I'm sorry, Mara, but it's too late for you to back out now. Mara shook her head, disbelief churning in her gut. A plan? What are you talking about? Who's behind this? Who are you really? Caitlin's eyes flickered for just a moment, like she was wrestling with something deep inside her. Then, she spoke, her voice tight and final. I'm here to make sure you don't find out too much. And now, you have to choose. You can walk away, forget everything you've learned, and try to get out of here. Or you can keep pushing, and they will come for you. They'll come for everyone. And there's no one who can stop them. Mara stood frozen, the weight of Caitlin's words pressing down on her like a vice. Her entire world had just been turned upside down. The truth, the lies, the choices she had to make, they were all blending together in a whirlwind of confusion and terror. She wanted to scream, to shout, to demand answers, but the fear, the danger, was right there in front of her, undeniable. Whatever was happening, whatever they were, it was bigger than anything she could have ever prepared for. And now, it was up to her to decide whether she would continue on the path she had started, risking everything for the truth, or whether she would let go, walk away, and live in the shadow of the lies forever. But the longer she hesitated, the more the fear pressed in on her, like a trap closing around her. The stakes had never been higher, and the choice was no longer just about finding the truth. It was about her survival, and with every second that ticked by, the urgency grew. Would she survive? Or would she become just another part of the plan? Mara's chest tightened as the realization hit her like a wave crashing over her head. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everyone. The chilling truth was sinking in, piece by agonizing piece, and she couldn't stop it. The conspiracy she had stumbled into, the one she thought was just some twisted series of coincidences and misunderstandings, was far larger than she had ever imagined. Her eyes locked onto Caitlin, searching for any trace of the person she had once known, but all she saw was the cold, calculating stare of someone who had already made their choice. The words Caitlin had spoken were ringing in her head, louder now than ever before. She hadn't been trying to protect her. Caitlin hadn't been trying to shield her from the truth, she had been trying to keep her from surviving it. Mara had been nothing but a pawn in someone else's game. But it wasn't just Caitlin. The fear that had been slowly building in Mara's chest now began to bleed into her every thought, as the weight of the truth slammed into her. Everyone around her had been hiding something. Alex. Caitlin. The man in the forest. They were all connected, all part of something much bigger, much darker, than she could have ever predicted. The chilling part was that it wasn't just a conspiracy about her. It was about them too. Every single one of them had been part of a carefully orchestrated plan that was designed to manipulate, control, and, in the end, erase whoever came too close to the truth. It wasn't a game. It was a system that reached into every corner of their lives, a system that had already started taking lives before hers. Her pulse raced as she backed away from Caitlin, her heart hammering. "What did you mean by they?" she managed to choke out, her voice barely above a whisper. "Who are they? What is this really about?" Her head spun as the words left her mouth, and she could feel the walls closing in on her. Caitlin didn't hesitate. Her eyes hardened, the vulnerability that Mara had seen earlier now completely gone, replaced with something far colder, far more dangerous. "You still don't get it, do you? They are everywhere. They've been watching you, listening to you, tracking you since the moment you started asking questions." Caitlin's voice had grown more confident, more detached, as if she had long accepted the role she played in all of this. "You weren't supposed to uncover this, Mara. You weren't supposed to dig this deep." Mara's stomach churned. "What are you talking about?" A low laugh slipped from Caitlin's lips, dark and humorless. "It's too late for you to back out now. You think you're some innocent victim, caught up in a game, but it's not like that. You're part of it. Always have been. The moment you walked into the woods, you stepped into something you can't escape from. The truth is, you were never meant to remember." Mara's breath caught in her throat, her mind struggling to piece together the fragments of everything Caitlin was saying. "What do you mean, never meant to remember? Who would do something like that? Why?" The desperation in her voice made it clear that the fear had now turned into something worse. It wasn't just confusion, it was the overwhelming sense that her entire existence had been manipulated from the start. The idea of never truly knowing who she was, who had made her, was a crushing weight on her shoulders. Caitlin's eyes flicked to the side, as if making sure no one was watching, before she stepped closer, her voice barely a whisper now. "You've been part of this experiment, Mara. They've been testing you, all of you. They have a plan to erase the past, erase memories, manipulate people into doing what they want. The forest, the messages, it was all part of it. And now, the people you trusted, your brother, Alex, they're all part of the same thing." Mara's head was spinning. "What? No. That can't be true." "Oh, but it is," Caitlin said with a cruel smile, her voice thick with something Mara couldn't place. "Alex. He's been in on it from the start. He's been protecting you, sure. But it wasn't because he cared about you. It's because he's part of the project too. He's the one who gave you that notebook. He's the one who made sure you stayed on track, so you could get to this point. So you could understand. He's not your ally, Mara. He's your keeper. The world tilted. The ground seemed to fall away beneath her feet, and for a moment, she couldn't breathe. The betrayal stung like a knife in her side, but what hurt more was the sickening truth that if Caitlin was right, everything she had ever believed about her relationship with Alex had been a lie. She had trusted him. She had loved him. And now, everything about him, everything they had been through together, felt like a betrayal. Her hands trembled, the notebook now feeling like a weight too heavy to carry. Her body was paralyzed, caught between disbelief and the growing urgency that something far worse was coming. And then the noise. A crack in the distance. At first, she thought it was her mind playing tricks on her, but then she heard it again, closer this time. She wasn't alone. Someone was out there, and they were coming for her. She turned back to Caitlin, desperation in her voice. We have to go. Now. Caitlin's eyes glinted, a dark glimmer of satisfaction in her gaze. It's too late for that. She nodded towards the tree line, where shadows moved, silent and fast. They're already here. Mara didn't hesitate. She bolted. Her feet pounded against the ground, heart racing, the crushing weight of Caitlin's words still ringing in her ears. Alex. Caitlin. They weren't just people caught up in something. They were part of something monstrous, something that had been manipulating her all along. The forest felt like a trap closing in on her, the trees pressing in from every side. But she couldn't stop. She had to keep moving, keep running, because for the first time in days, she could feel the true danger closing in around her. Suddenly, the ground beneath her feet gave way. She barely had time to react as she tumbled into a hidden pit, falling through the earth like she was being swallowed whole. She hit the bottom with a sickening thud, pain shooting through her body, and for a split second, everything went black. When her vision cleared, she was lying in a cold, dark space. Her head was spinning, and she could barely make sense of where she was, but the sound of footsteps above her, muffled by the earth, made it clear that she wasn't alone anymore. They had found her. They were closing in. And now, she had no choice but to face whatever this was. Whatever they wanted from her, whatever role she had been playing in their game, it was all leading to this moment. There was no running anymore. The time for answers had come. And if she wanted to survive, she had to confront the truth and the people who had been pulling her strings from the very beginning. The darkness pressed in on Mara as she stumbled through the cave-like pit, her breaths sharp and shallow, each one feeling heavier than the last. The sound of footsteps above, once distant, now echoed closer, and her heart hammered in her chest, like it might burst out of her ribs. She scrambled to her feet, the cold, jagged rock beneath her hands scraping at her palms as she searched for any way out, but it was hopeless. The walls were smooth, steep, and unyielding, and the only way forward was through the suffocating darkness that stretched in front of her. She had no choice but to face whatever was waiting in that black abyss. The air was thick, stale with the smell of earth and decay, and every sense in her body screamed that she was being hunted. Her mind raced, still processing the truth Caitlin had revealed that nothing about her life, her past, had been her own. She wasn't the victim. She wasn't a pawn. She was the final piece of a carefully constructed puzzle, the key to unlocking whatever plan had been set into motion long before she had even known it existed. Her hands trembled as they gripped the edges of the jagged walls, but she had no time for fear. The pit was closing in on her, and the people behind it were getting closer. And then, just as the silence began to close in, a voice sliced through it like a blade. Mara. Her pulse leapt in her throat as the sound of the voice, soft but deliberate, floated toward her from the shadows. It was the last voice she expected to hear, the one person she thought she could trust above all others. Alex, she gasped, her voice raw, the word feeling foreign on her lips. She turned, searching through the blackness, praying her eyes weren't deceiving her. But there he stood, just beyond her reach, the faintest outline of his silhouette cutting through the oppressive darkness. His face was hidden, but she could feel the weight of his presence like an invisible force pressing against her chest. You shouldn't have come down here, Mara, he said, his voice cold, flat, devoid of the warmth she once remembered. You could have walked away. You should have walked away. Mara's heart lurched. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. This wasn't the Alex she had known. This wasn't the man who had sworn to protect her, to keep her safe. The realization hit like a punch to the gut, a truth she had known deep down but had been too afraid to face. You've been part of this, haven't you? Her voice was shaking with anger, disbelief, a hurt that went deeper than anything she'd ever felt before. You knew, Alex. You knew all of this, and you kept me in the dark. You lied to me. You let me think. I didn't lie, he interrupted, his voice suddenly sharp. I protected you. I kept you alive. I did what I had to do to keep you from discovering the truth too soon. Too soon. Mara's hands clenched into fists, her nails biting into her skin. What is this? What is it all for? Why are you doing this? He stepped forward, and she could now make out the coldness in his eyes, a darkness that hadn't been there before. It was as if the man she had known had been replaced by someone else, someone who had long ago made peace with the lies, the manipulation. It's not about you, Mara. Not anymore. It's about them. He motioned toward the shadows behind him, and Mara's stomach dropped. She couldn't see who or what he was referring to, but she knew, deep down, that whatever was coming, whatever had been set in motion, was far worse than she had ever imagined. Who are they, Alex? Who are these people? She demanded, her voice desperate. She could feel her pulse racing in her throat as the gravity of everything, of all the lies, the manipulation, began to overwhelm her. He didn't answer immediately, his eyes scanning the darkness, the tension thick between them. Then, almost as if relishing the finality of it, he spoke again, his voice low, almost apologetic. You were never meant to remember, Mara. You were never meant to know. But they needed someone like you. Someone who could break the cycle. Someone who could start over. Mara's mind whirled. She wanted to scream, to demand that he tell her everything, but something inside her told her she was missing the key piece. The final, horrible piece of the puzzle. She could feel it, just on the edge of her understanding. But she couldn't quite grasp it. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows behind Alex, stepping forward with quiet certainty. It was Caitlin. Her face was pale, but there was no trace of the friend Mara had once known, just the same coldness that had consumed Alex. I'm sorry, Caitlin said, her voice heavy with regret. I didn't want it to be like this, but you've been given a choice from the beginning. A choice you can't escape. Mara's mind was spinning. Choice? What are you talking about? You all lied to me. Caitlin's eyes softened, but only for a moment, before the mask of indifference slid back into place. It's not about lying, Mara. It's about control. About power. You've always been the key. The key to ending everything. She paused, the silence hanging heavy in the air, then continued, you were chosen. From the start. We needed you to break the cycle. Mara's world was crumbling around her, and she couldn't breathe. Break the cycle? What cycle? Before either of them could respond, a loud, sharp noise cut through the air, a scream, coming from somewhere deep in the cave, followed by the sound of footsteps running. The ground beneath Mara's feet shook, and for a split second, everything seemed to freeze. Then, a figure appeared at the entrance of the cavern, their silhouette tall and imposing. The sudden realization hit her like a ton of bricks as the figure stepped forward, revealing a face she had seen only once before, the man with no past. The one who had been watching her all this time. His eyes locked with hers, and for a moment, there was a strange, almost familiar recognition between them. It's time, Mara, he said, his voice calm but laced with an eerie finality. It's time to finish what was started. Mara couldn't move. She couldn't think. The man's words echoed in her mind as she tried to process everything that had been thrown at her. The pieces were falling into place too fast, too many to understand, and yet one thing was clear. Every single thing, had been set in motion long before she had ever even stepped into the forest. She was the answer. She was the key. And as the walls of the cavern seemed to close in, she realized that she was no longer just a victim in this game. She was the final move, the one they had all been waiting for. But what choice would she make? The man's gaze hardened as he stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. The truth, Mara, is that you never had a choice at all. And then, everything went black. Mara's eyes fluttered open, the world coming into focus with a slow, groggy clarity that made her dizzy. She was no longer in the cave, no longer standing at the mercy of Alex, Caitlin, or the man with no past. Instead, she was back at the edge of the forest, the place where everything had begun. The trees loomed over her like silent sentinels, their branches swaying gently in the breeze as if nothing had happened. As if none of it mattered anymore. She tried to sit up, but her body felt heavy, as if it carried the weight of everything she had endured. The fear, the confusion, the betrayals, they lingered in her mind like a fog she couldn't shake off. But there was something else there now too. Something quieter, something that felt like acceptance. She was alive. She had survived. But at what cost? Her thoughts turned back to the events that had brought her to this point. The mysterious messages, the unsettling encounters, the labyrinth of lies that had unraveled before her. The people who had once been her friends, her allies, her brother Alex, Caitlin, even the man who had been watching her all along, had all played their parts in the game. A game she had never truly understood, one that had manipulated her at every turn. She had been their final piece, the one they had planned for from the very beginning. But now, with the answers she had uncovered, with the truth finally in her hands, she had made a choice. Not the one they expected, not the one they wanted, but a choice for herself. The wind shifted, rustling through the leaves as if the forest itself was urging her to move, to leave behind the past and keep walking forward. The truth was, she didn't have all the answers. Not everything had been solved. Not everything made sense. The man with no past, the hidden conspiracies, the vast, tangled web of control and manipulation, it was bigger than her, bigger than anything she had ever imagined. And yet, in the midst of the chaos, there was something she had learned about herself that she could never forget. She was stronger than they had ever realized. Stronger than they had anticipated when they first pulled her into their game. Mara's gaze lifted to the horizon, where the first light of dawn was beginning to break through the thick canopy of trees, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. There was a sense of calm in the air, a quiet peace that settled over her like a blanket. For the first time in a long time, she could breathe. It wasn't that the threat was gone, or that the dangers had been eradicated. No, the world was still filled with shadows, still filled with people who operated in the darkness. The conspiracy, the people behind the manipulation, were still out there, still watching. But Mara had found something they could never take from her, the power to choose. As she stood up, brushing the dirt from her clothes, she realized that the forest, the place that had been so full of fear and uncertainty for her, was now a symbol of something else entirely. It was a place of rebirth, a place where she had fought for the truth and, against all odds, had survived. It was a reminder that no matter how deep the lies ran, no matter how many people tried to control her, she was capable of forging her own path. The world might not have given her answers, but she had learned that sometimes, the questions were just as important. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she instinctively pulled it out, expecting to see a message from Alex, from Caitlin, or even some cryptic clue left behind by the man with no past. But instead, it was an unfamiliar number, one she didn't recognize. She hesitated, her thumb hovering over the screen, the quiet tension building in the pit of her stomach. For a moment, she considered ignoring it, leaving it unanswered as she had so many times before. But then, something made her press the button and open the message. The text was short, but it carried the weight of something far bigger than anything she could have imagined. You were never meant to remember, Mara. But it's not over. Not yet. The message lingered on the screen, its words seeping into her mind like poison. She didn't know who had sent it. She didn't know what it meant. But what she did know was that the story wasn't over. The truth she had uncovered wasn't the end of the journey, it was only the beginning. There was still more to discover, still more questions to answer, and still more pieces to this puzzle that were waiting to fall into place. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the message press against her chest, but then something shifted inside her. The fear, the uncertainty, it all seemed to fade into the background as she made her decision. She was done running. She was done being manipulated. If they thought they could control her, they were wrong. She was in control now. With a steady breath, Mara looked up at the sky, at the rising sun that now bathed the world in a new light, and she walked forward. Her future was uncertain, filled with more questions than answers, but one thing was clear, she would no longer be anyone's pawn. The game was far from over, But now, Mara had the power to play it on her own terms. And as she disappeared into the woods, the whispers of the conspiracy still hung in the air, but now, they held no power over her. Because she had learned the most important truth of all, the only way out of the darkness was to choose the light. And no one could take that away from her. As the screen fades to black, the last words echo in the minds of the audience, "It's not over." And with that, the mystery remains, an open door leading to an unknown future, leaving the audience to reflect on everything they've just witnessed, to question the nature of control, memory, and truth.